My name is Summer Gathercole, and I'm going to be facilitating today's webinar. This is part of it's a 12-part series sponsored by WorkLife Partnership on innovative work incentive practices. We are highlighting non-traditional methods of incentivizing employees. So today's webinar is focused on NewAge Industries, and they're going to share their experience in implementing an employee stock ownership program, including the process that they went through, the challenges that they faced, the changes that they've seen within their own company, and some words of advice for those of you who might be interested in doing the same thing. Before we actually jump into their presentation, again, I wanted to go over a couple of logistics. Everyone except for the presenters is in mute to eliminate the background noise. So just please keep that in mind as a participant in the webinar. If you have questions, and we definitely encourage you to ask them, please post them in the chat box. Keep in mind that whatever you put in the chat box can be seen by everybody, but we definitely want to encourage you to ask questions. We will address questions at the end of the webinar, but you can feel free to type in your questions as they come up. We'll be watching and monitoring the chat box to make sure that we capture all the questions that are in there. At the end of the webinar, we will be directing you to a survey. It takes about 30 seconds to complete, but we do want to hear your feedback, so we really encourage you to share that with us. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our presenters today, Ken Baker and Jeff Johnson. Ken is the CEO of NewAge Industries. He is the second generation of his family to carry on the successes of this plastic and rubber tubing company. He has over 30 years of experience in the industry, and in 2006, Ken decided to establish the Employee Stock Ownership Program, and its employees now own 49% of the company. Jeff Johnson is the team leader of the Verigenics product group and chairman of the Employee Stock Ownership Program Committee. He's been with NewAge Industries for 25 years, and he's going to share some of his experiences of the transition to an ESOP through the eyes of an employee. So with that, I want to thank both Ken and Jeff for joining us today, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Summer. Really appreciate the opportunity to present the NewAge story and how it relates to employee stock ownership plans. We're very excited about this business model, as I call it, with employee ownership. It's kind of been an experiment for me. I didn't know really how it was going to turn out, but it has, I think, turned out quite nicely, and it's been a win-win-win all the way around the board. Some of the specs about NewAge, people like to kind of understand who we're dealing with. We have 130 team members. We're a $41 million sales organization. Been in business for a fair amount of time, 64 years, and as Summer mentioned, I'm the second generation. I bought my brother out in 1997, bought my father out in 1998, and I was the last Baker standing. So we've been profitable all 64 years, and we start businesses from scratch, greenfield, if you will. We're an international organization. We have distribution around the world. We sell product to many organizations. And as I mentioned, we are a ESOP company, Employee Stock Ownership Plan. So I sold 30% of the firm in 2006, and then I did another tranche, another deal in 2012. I did 10%, and then this last year, 2006, I did a 9% sale of the shares. So that makes the organization 49-51%. And you may ask the question, well, why did you do 49% versus 50% or something like that? Well, when you go over 51% of ownership, then the ESOP kind of drives the bus of the organization, and I really didn't want to be fired. So I throw that out as an idea. And so anyway, why don't we move on to the next slide? So NewAge trades under three names. NewAge Industries, which is an industrial and food grade organization which makes PVC, polyurethane, nylon, Teflon, and fittings for industrial and food grade types of organizations throughout the United States. And the next slide. And Avanipure is our high purity business that we started in 2000. And they service the pharmaceutical processing and biotech processing industry. We make tubing and hose and fittings as well as systems, which is the photo on the left side of your screen. Next slide. Jeff, why don't you talk about Barogenics?
This is Jeff. Barogenics is a product group that we created 10 years ago to enable the tracking of assets, goods, things like medical device consumables and pumps and valves in the pharma biotech industry. We do that by enabling radio frequency identification to be a carrier for information on those products. It's become an interesting offshoot of our processes because while it is complementary, it has its own unique industry. It's been a success so far. We're hoping to see continued growth.
Next slide, please. So we have lots of big equipment such as extruders and injection molding machines and cutters and pullers and all sorts of things to make our product. We are basically a manufacturing company. The next slide will show some of the product applications that we sell into: orange juice filling lines, vaccine production, coffee makers, as well as vial filling lines, which is the lower left-hand photo. The next slide shows our headquarters in Southampton, Pennsylvania, just north of Philadelphia. All those gray parts or squares on our roof is solar panels. We power half of our electricity through solar electricity, and we have over 4,000 panels. Next slide, please. So some of the benefits that we offer our team members, we offer health care. About 70 to 80% of the premium is paid by the company. We have a 401k with a match. Excuse me. And we have as I mentioned, an ESOP, which is a retirement plan. And I'll go into a little bit more detail later on in the presentation about that. We also share the profits with the team members quarterly. That's through a gain sharing program. And what it is a pool of money, which is the drivers of that is gross margin for the organization and the cost of employment throughout the organization. So between the ESOP and the gain sharing, those are two very highly motivating financial tools which create wealth for the team members within the organization. We have several committees. We have a wellness committee. We have healthy eating. Last year we bought over 5,000 pounds of bananas for our employees. We have fresh fruit around the building. We have nuts. As a matter of fact, we have 2 bowls of nuts on the table right here in the conference room. We do chair massages and mindfulness training. And we also have a fun committee. And Jeff, why don't you talk a little bit about the ESOP committee?
The ESOP committee was formed in order to communicate the values and beliefs of an ESOP culture. I was, at the outset, when Ken first presented the concept of an ESOP, I was likely one of the biggest pessimists in the organization. Over the course of the last 10 years, I would probably be considered its biggest proponent aside from Ken. I've seen how the process works, what it does for employee morale, and all these things that we're talking about here are all touch points for communication. The fun committee, the wellness program, the gain share. You have short-term goals and long-term goals. And one of the neat external activities is to send our employees out for a nice dinner once a month. So we partnered with a local restaurant, or a few local restaurants, in order to allow them to have a charge account that comes back to the company that gives them that evening out with their spouse or their friend on the company. And then lastly, we have a very generous tuition reimbursement program where we encourage our employees to learn. When they learn, they bond. When they bond, they understand.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the ESOP. It is a retirement plan. So the monies that are garnered throughout the years are paid out at retirement. As we mentioned, it was started in 2006. And over the 10 years which this plan has been in place, the share price of NewAge stock has gone up 630%. Now, that's only a part of the story. We also pay dividends because the ESOP owns 49% of the company, and when there is a dividend paid, the ESOP gets 49% of every dollar of dividend which is paid, which is a substantial amount of money, which is actually more dollars in the ESOP trust than the share value, which is quite interesting. Now, the ESOP is controlled by the Department of Labor and is part of ERISA. And so it is a government plan. So with that, you cannot be prejudicial about the plan. Every employee of the organization has to be part of this plan, from the CEO down to the any hourly worker. So the next slide, please. So why did I establish the ESOP? I get this question asked all the time, and my shares that I actually bought from my brother and my father were one of the largest assets I had in my portfolio, and it allowed me to take a fair amount of money off the table in 3 different tranches. And the interesting thing about that is that I was able to get a higher share price as the years went on because the organization was much more efficient and more profitable. As I mentioned, the share price went up 630%. Now, the shares are free to the employees. They do not pay for these shares. Now, they will have to pay taxes on all the benefits as ordinary income when they do retire and they take that money out of the retirement plan. Now, another reason why I established this is I wanted to give the team members of the organization a feeling of ownership. And when I'm talking about ownership is I wanted to change the idea of work where the team member feels they're part of something larger than themselves. And I view that's a very American thing. That's why churches have done so well growing their organizations throughout the country. The Americans want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And being part of an ESOP, that does exactly that. It was also a good fit for our corporate culture. We have a family-type culture here. There's many relatives that work within the organization, and I felt it was a good addition to that. I wanted to reward team members that have helped build this organization, such as Jeff. Jeff's been here for over 25 years. We have people that have been here for over 30 years, and they really helped build this organization. I can't sit here and say I did it alone. No, I had many wonderful people working for this organization and that put their heart and soul into it. And I wanted to create a reward for them, and the ESOP has done that. it creates long-term wealth. We have had people that have retired from this organization with literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in their retirement plan. And they have said if it wasn't for the ESOP, they wouldn't have been able to retire. And one particular individual who recently retired has an invalid husband at home, and it allowed her to go home and really take care of her husband and not be this pull between work and him and really not giving him good care. And the ESOP was allowed her to do that. And I got a very warm email from her about that. It also keeps an excellent team together. As you know, with LinkedIn and all these headhunters looking for new team members and all that, the pull of another job is always out there. And I don't think a lot of people may want to walk away from a benefit that's literally giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to you and also providing this feeling of ownership. And I felt that it would give a differential to our customers. Most of our competitors, and I say probably all our competitors, are large multinationals, multi-billion-dollar organizations. Now, we're a privately held company, and we're an ESOP, and it makes us, I think, a bit of a competitive advantage to that. Next slide, please. So what are some of the downsides? Well, the team members do not receive the benefits immediately. It is a retirement plan, so they have to wait for these benefits. And by the way, we don't allow loans from them. You have to do training, and you have to do training a lot. You have to teach the team members, the employees, what it is to be an owner. You don't come out of the womb being an owner. You have to teach what are the behaviors of an owner and how to facilitate of being an owner. Communication is big, and that's where Jeff's department comes in and his committee. He's done a wonderful job. Jeff, why don't you talk a little bit about some of the communications that your committee has done?
The excellence in communication drives a lot of what makes an ESOP successful. I have to credit Ken for an early decision he made, and it's one of the reasons I mentioned earlier that I became such a big proponent, is that he formed an advisory committee, not a decision-making committee, but an advisory committee to sit through all of the decision-making that was occurring during the formation of the ESOP. I was a member of that committee. I learned a lot, and through that, I recognized that the only way for people to really understand the significant benefit that they are receiving is to be educated on a regular basis, to communicate the values and the culture, and to understand what that bottom line is at the end of their service with NewAge Industries.
The language has to change within the organization from this is your extrusion equipment, Ken, to it's our extrusion equipment. And let me tell you a little story about that. We have a lot of fork trucks that drive around our plant and take raw material to our extruders and take finished goods back into the warehouse. So one day, during my walking around NBWA, if you will, around the plant, I noticed fork truck drivers laying a patch, spinning the wheels of the fork truck, basically beating the fork truck up. So I go up to him and I say, Joe, why is it that you're beating up your fork truck? And he looks at me with big eyes. And then I say, here's a better question, Joe. Why are you beating up John's fork truck? And I point to one of the guys on the floor that is one of the extrusion operators. And he looks at me and then he puts his head down and looks at the floor. It was a different way of talking about equipment, ownership, and how you treat equipment and assets within the company. They own them. And if they're beating up their fork truck, they're beating up not only their fork truck, but everybody's fork truck. So that really kind of changes your mindset on how you view capital equipment and also expenses within the organization. ESOPs are a slightly more complex transaction than a sale to another company. And so you have to be aware of that. And it may take a bit longer than a normal sale of a company to, let's say, a competitor or to a multinational. Let's move on to the next slide. So some of the measurements that NewAge uses, on a very top level, of course, it's share price, dividend distribution, and gross margin. We have those measurements all the time. But we also measure our turnover time, our turnover of team members within the organization, and we're in the single digits with that. But we're also in the process of developing out key performance indicators, KPIs if you will, from a departmental level as well as KPIs for the whole organization. And this is part of our moving towards the new ISO standard, which we are currently in the process of doing. Let's move to the next slide, please. So I wanted to put this slide up in case there are some people on the webinar that would be considering this. So an ESOP would be right for you, and it's not right for every single company. And we'll talk about what it's not right for, but first we'll talk about if you are an owner and care about the employees and you consider the legacy about how you've created the organization and you care about that, you may be a candidate. If you have a fear of what may happen to the company if it's bought by a multinational, a competitor, and what could happen in the way of layoffs or moving or just dismantling the whole company, you may be a candidate. If you care about the community where the company has located and grown and worry about if layoffs do happen because the multinational moves it to North Carolina, Mexico, or China, that may be a candidate as well. And the hope for the company over the long term to reward the team members who help build the company, if that is a concern for you and a hope for you, that may also be, you may be. The next slide, please. And if the owner is not concerned about getting the top dollar for the company, because an ESOP will pay fair market value, a financial value for the company, but it cannot pay a strategic value, such as a competitor buying another company and 1 and 1 equals 3, because the competitor now has taken you off the table and now they can raise the prices and consolidate the plant and eliminate the accounting department and maybe the HR department and lower their costs. If you want to give your employees a no-cost retirement plan, as I mentioned, and Jeff can contest to this, that no money is taken out of your paycheck to pay for these shares. This is a free part to the employees. And if I haven't mentioned it already, the ESOP is tax-free, federally tax-free. So NewAge is 49% tax-free. And when I ultimately sell 100% of the company to the ESOP, which I will do in some time in the future, and everybody here in the company wants to know when, including Jeff, it will become 100% tax-free, pays no state or federal tax. So the question is, what do you do with all that money that you're sending to the IRS? Well, you may be able to build another plant, hire more team members, come up with a new product. Who knows what you can do with all that money? And so that's an important aspect of it. Why don't we go to the next slide? And why don't we dive into some questions that some of you have.
Thanks, Ken. This is Summer again, and I have to say I'm almost kind of wanting to apply for a position at your company so I could work there because it sounds really good. I'm curious. I want to kind of go back to one of the things that you said around, whether ESOP is right for any particular company. I mean, you think that this is an option that any company could or should consider, or do you think there are some parameters or guidelines that you would offer?
All right. Yes, there are three. You really should have about 20 to 25 employees. There has to be mass with the company. It should have profitability on a consistent level, meaning that you can't have up and down profitability because there's going to be some loans which have to be repaid over time. Excuse me. And there really cannot be a toxic culture between ownership and the rank and file. If there's toxic and mistrust on a deep level, then the employees will wonder what's really going on, and the owner's really just trying to benefit him or herself, and that's a problem. So those are the three acid tests to start with. As I mentioned, if the owner is looking for the top dollar for the company, doesn't care about the employees, doesn't care about the legacy, wants to get the check and go to Florida to play golf, and doesn't care what happens to the company, that's not a candidate for an ESOP. But I submit to you that the vast majority, and I'm going to put a number out here, 70% of the owners of companies do care about their employees, do care about the legacy, and do care about the community which they're in. Those are good candidates for this. And the problem is, and why we're doing this seminar, is that guys like me don't know that this option is available to them. They get these letters from private equity and their competitors and multinationals that say, why don't you buy, we'd love to buy your company, we'll give you top dollar, all of that type of rhetoric. And the founder of the company doesn't know, I could make this whole company tax-free and reward all my long-term team members with a tremendous amount of wealth, and I walk away with a ton of money. So that hopefully that answered your question, Summer.
No, it does. And actually kind of leads me to another question, which is if I'm, for some of the participants on the call, on the webinar today, who are not owners of the company, but employees, and let's just say they heard you mention those three kind of criteria that need to be in place before an ESOP can even be considered. If that company is meeting all of the criteria and an employee is saying, I think we could benefit from being an ESOP, what do you think is the best way for an employee to approach the owner of the company about that kind of idea? Or is that just not even something that should occur? Because I realize the sensitivity of it.
No. I think it should occur. Now, if you have an owner that is being distracted, spending more time golfing than working, and is kind of tired of the company, and you can see that with owners. They've lost that spark. I would, I call it, hey boss, why don't you sell it to us attitude. Mm-hmm. And first I would get educated about some of the benefits of an ESOP before you approach the founder. And one place you could go to is the National Center for Employee Ownership, the nceo.org. That site has a ton of information on it about ESOPs, what are the benefits, and I just scratched the surface in this webinar. And if you educate yourself, then you could approach the owner maybe with the head of finance and get the head of finance to actually go on the NCEO site and start seeing some of the financial benefits of the of what an ESOP is. And then maybe the two of you approach the owner and say, you know, there is an option here where you don't have to sell to our competitor that we've been loathing for all these years, or sell to a private equity company and you really don't know what's really going to happen to the company afterwards. But we will take care of the company, boss. Sell it to us. So that could be an approach that you could take.
That's great. And I think that's really helpful for others to hear who might be interested in trying to figure out how do they frame this for the boss to get their buy-in. Yeah, I think one last question actually for Jeff. And Jeff, I really appreciate you being so open about the fact that you were so skeptical in the very beginning. And now it sounds like you're one of the biggest proponents of the ESOP. How did the rest of the team feel about it? I mean, and where do they stand now?
There were early adopters, and there were still some stragglers. It's very challenging today to take a, for lack of a better term, millennial personality and convince them that a career at an organization is the right way to go. Turnover among the younger crowd seems to be a badge of honor, as opposed to the way it was years ago with the traditionalists, that you took a job, you kept it for your life, and you got a gold watch when you retired. Better than a gold watch. And in helping people understand that is my job. As ESOP committee chair, I strive every week, every quarter to get more and more people to understand the hockey stick curve that you see on your retirement investments. Anyone who's had a 401k for a number of years understands it, but younger generation perhaps may not. It's an excellent tool for motivation, and I'm just glad to have been a part of it.
Great, thank you.
Summer, if you want a more in-depth conversation or webinar, we could go deeper into it in another webinar where I can kind of show you how it works, and if the audience views that as worthwhile, I could do that at a later time.
That's fantastic, and I really appreciate your generosity and willingness to kind of share your time with others about this topic, because I do think it does sound like something that probably isn't at the forefront of everybody's minds, and isn't something that people think about as a viable option, but it certainly sounds like you've been able to make it work for your company in a really impressive way. And that's actually a great segue to the participants on the webinar to really ask you to complete the survey. It takes about 30 seconds to complete, but that gives us some input about what you thought of today's webinar, if you want more information, and what you'd like to see in future webinars. The next webinar is April 26th at 2:30 Mountain Time, and we will be hearing at that point from New Belgium Brewery, who established an on-site medical clinic for their employees. So we're going to hear about their experience and how they really focused on making sure that they were providing basic health care for all of their employees in some very different ways. I also want to encourage everyone to visit our webinar resources. You can see the link to the webpage there, and encourage you to continue to join our conversation as well. And finally, I just want to thank Ken and Jeff from NewAge Industries for being with us today. It was incredibly helpful. Are there any final words of wisdom that you want to share?
Well, yes, I'd like to let you know that New Belgium Brewery is a ESOP as well, and a very big advocate of ESOPs in the craft brew industry.
Exactly. I'm sure we will be we will be touching on that as well during that webinar. It certainly seems to be a hot topic these days.
Yes, I think it's one of the best business models out there, with private equity snatching up businesses and wringing them out of their cash and then reselling them in 3 to 5 years. This is a wonderful alternative to that, and I think anti-American way of doing business. I think the ESOP is a great American way because it's shared capitalism. You're providing wealth for the whole company, not just 1 or 2 people at the top.
And
well, I think you definitely. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
No, I was just going to say that there may be something your customer will see that you may not immediately recognize. If you go to the NCEO site and look through the list of companies that are employee-owned, I think anyone who recognizes or has done business with one of those companies will find a direct correlation between their level of satisfaction and that company being an ESOP.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say you've made a very strong business case today, from having, I think, established a really loyal workforce to also establishing a workforce that's really happy. I mean, it's hard to argue with being able to walk away in retirement with a couple $100,000 available so that you can live comfortably. So again, I just want to thank you both for your time and for walking us through the basics, and certainly look forward to continuing the conversation.
Okay.
And
thank you.
Thank you all, the participants today, and we look forward to hopefully having you participate in the next webinar. Take care, everybody.